Well, welcome to the first of two sessions today on Predator-Free New Zealand 2050. I think we've got a great lineup of speakers for both sessions. And I should introduce myself. My name's Roger Peck. I'm from Landcare Research, and I'm just chairing this first session. And our first speaker today is Professor Mick Clout from the University of Auckland, who's going to probably give us the main reason for wanting to make New Zealand predator-free. Welcome, Mick.
Thanks very much, Roger. So I'm going to be talking about science for conservation, which I think is the research that is done to support predator-free New Zealand is effectively science for conservation. And there are, of course, some challenges in this whole concept, this great vision. And it was really good to have Fiona's talk earlier on, which is quite a nice intro to how we're going with this. So let's just get straight into it. I'm going to just give an introduction, and then I'm going to move on to giving some examples of research relating particularly to incursions and interactions between mammals, which I think are quite relevant for predator-free New Zealand and what we need to do to make that work in the long run. And then I'm going to finish up with some thoughts, really, lessons and challenges for predator-free New Zealand 2050. So that's where we're going. So the major threats to New Zealand birds has been work done on this, and John Innes and colleagues did a really good paper and review on this back in 2010, and the major threats to New Zealand native birds are predation, and predation. So basically, that is what we're dealing with here. If we're trying to conserve our native wildlife, in particular our birds, which interest me especially, that's what we've got to do, and that's where predator-free New Zealand really fits right into the picture. So we've actually made a lot of progress over the last decades with eradications of mammals from islands around New Zealand. And New Zealand, in fact, is now a world leader in this area. In fact, probably has been a world leader in it right from the start of this whole approach. Progressive eradications of mammals from many New Zealand's islands, starting more than 50 years ago now. And these islands have also been sites which then, as safe havens, can be used for translocations to aid the recovery of threatened species. And that's really a good vision or a good basis to look at predator-free New Zealand, where we might be going with that as we move ahead, perhaps to the next stages. So I'm quite interested in kakapo, been involved with the kakapo program for over 20 years now, and it's a classic example of a species which has effectively been saved because there are predator-free sites. So kakapo numbers have went through a great decline on Rakiura, Stewart Island, due to cat predation, and they'd already disappeared effectively from most of the rest of New Zealand, probably largely due to stoat predation. But from the 1980s onwards, there were translocations to islands, islands free of introduced mammalian predators, and you can see the result there that we've now got about the same number of kakapo that we had perhaps 40 years ago. Still not a lot of birds, 154 if we're lucky, but they are in safe places. The trouble is we're now running out of space. So for this species, they need a fair bit of space. They're on 2 or 3 islands, but we need more islands, we need more space to recover this population more. And in fact, we're already discussing the possibility of translocation of kakapo to Resolution Island, which is a large island down in Fiordland, but which still has stoat incursions, and it's managing that sort of risk. So the idea of predator-free New Zealand and the technology that might come out of that is going to help with birds like the kakapo and with managing, in the interim, these birds and others in the presence of maybe small numbers of predators with incursions still happening. So that's really just a bit of a background. I'd like to move on to talk about eradications and some of the consequences of that. So here's some quite old data now. showing how we've increased the number of rodent eradications on islands. Great, that's really good, but you also look at the little dotted line there and there in the spots, that's the number of incursions onto islands. So we still have rodents, rats in particular, on the mainland, and they can get back out to islands. We also have the same situation with stoats, which are very good swimmers, we found, and so the more places you clear of these predators, the more are available for them to invade, to reinvade. So there we need to know about incursions and how to detect incursions and how to detect, ideally, the source of incursions. And in that context, Rangitoto Motatapu up in the Hauraki Gulf is a great example of a place where eradications have been done and there has been great recovery of the populations of wildlife on that island. Possums and wallabies eradicated 96 to 2000, multiple operation in 2009, rats, mice, cats, rabbits, hedgehogs and stoats. A lot of people don't really know much about this eradication, but it was a very successful one. Now got takahe, saddlebacks, etc., released onto Rangitoto Motatapu. But 12 months after the eradication, in 2010, a stoat was trapped on Rangitoto. And the question was it a survivor? Was it part of the original population which had been supposedly eradicated, or was it perhaps an invader? And Andrew Veal, a PhD student of mine in the past and also a PhD student of Diane Gleason's, did some work. Fortunately, and this shows the value of having samples, he had collected samples of tissue samples from the original population of stoats on the island. So it was possible to then look at the incursion. So this one here is where the stoat was found. And to say, okay, well, was that genetically similar to the original population? Was it a survivor from the original population, or was it in fact an invader? And in fact, the data quite clearly show that in fact it fits in with the mainland population in terms of genetic profile compared with Rangitoto population where the samples had been gathered before. So it was an invader. It had swum about 3 kilometres or more out to the island. Since then, stoats have been detected. Another one was detected on Motatapu in 2014, and of course we've had the Kapiti Island incursion where a female stoat swam out there more than 5 kilometres and established a small population and was subsequently eradicated. So we have an issue there with incursions. So the point I wanted to make there is just the value of genetic information to deal with and identify the source of incursions. I want to just move on quickly now to interactions between invasive mammals. I've got a couple of examples here. The first one is Hauturu, Little Barrier Island. Introduced mammals implicated there in the decline of seabird populations. There were rats, that's Kiori, and cats on the island, both implicated as predators of the Cook's petrel. Cats were eradicated in 1980, and the Kiori not until much later, in 2004. So there was a good baseline of data, and this shows the value of long-term data sets. And it's another point I want to make, is that we need to have long-term data sets. Mike Imber and colleagues, but particularly Mike, had done research on Cook's petrel out there on that island for several years, and he was able to show that the Kiori, when the Kiori was still present but the cats had gone, the breeding success went down. Only when the Kiori were also taken off did it go up. So another example of interactions between predators is some other recent research by Patrick Garvey, who's been looking at interactions between top predators. We're talking here about cats, ferrets, and stoats, and how they might interact with each other. We just don't know enough about these sorts of interactions. There is some evidence of competition between stoats and ferrets. Data from the Tasman Valley in the 2000s, where trapping was done of stoats and ferrets. You can see here there's an area where there were effectively no stoats, but there were lots of ferrets. Move on down the line where the ferrets have been intensively trapped, and you end up with a situation like this, where in fact, in the absence of ferrets, the stoats seem to have moved into that area. Evidence of competitive interaction between these species. But the interesting thing, and Patrick has found this, stoats are actually attracted to ferret odour, and there's a recent paper which he's published which explains this. So we have here what seems like, firstly, a conundrum, but stoats are actually attracted to the odour of this top predator using detections of ferret odour put in with rabbit meat into sites and comparing that with just rabbit meat. You get more stoat detections coming into the sites where rabbit meat plus ferret odour is there, and it lasts for a long time. This will attract stoats for a month after it's put out. So the implications of that are that we may have another tool here. By understanding more about the interactions between these top predators, we may have another tool for detecting and perhaps controlling stoats. So again, showing the value of research which can help to underpin potentially the management of these pests. So Predator-Free New Zealand, a very old slide produced by Andrea and Susan Timmins back in 2012. Begin with islands, learn as we go, progressively add defensible chunks of the mainland. Possums in Northland. There's a great predator-proof fence there. Auckland would be a very, very difficult place for possum to get back across because of the motorway. So maybe we could start with possums up there. That's just a facile comment, really, but some of the challenges for mammal-led eradication on mainland New Zealand, though, are obviously interactions between mammal species, as I've briefly explained. We still don't really understand a lot of these interactions. If we're going to be managing a whole suite of predators, we need to understand how they interact with each other, what the consequences are of taking out one, not the other. Really important, I haven't touched on this yet, but I want to just finish up by talking about this. The social context is vital. The acceptability of aerial poisoning, 1080 and so on, there's been a brief discussion about that before. That is a big challenge. And conducting eradications in urban areas where people live is a huge challenge as well. So these are big steps. So invasives in urban areas, which we really haven't done eradications there yet. Rodents, this is just off the top of the head sort of comment, but rodents are widespread. I think stoats are largely absent from most urban areas. Possums can be controlled fairly easily. They're just Australians, you can get rid of them quite easily. Domestic cats pose a major threat to native birds. Now, they're not part of Predator-Free New Zealand target at the moment, but cats really are a big issue. And as I said before, cats just about wiped out kakapo on Stewart Island. Cats in urban areas are a big threat. I think eradications in urban areas represent a major social challenge, and that's where we need to be looking at research to underpin that. So in conclusion, Predator-Free New Zealand, it's a great vision. It now needs a strategy and a plan. That's underway, as I understand it. We need to be moving ahead with this. Major challenges include the social context and eradications in urban areas where people live. Most of the eradications that have been done so far have been in uninhabited islands, on uninhabited islands, or in sanctuaries, fenced sanctuaries on the mainland. We need new tools and techniques. There is research going on into that. We also, though, need to make sure there is research monitoring what happens after you take out some of these predators and the demonstration of benefits. If you're going to be actually getting people on board to try and do this in the long run, they need to see that there are benefits. And one point to mention, I think, is that you can argue that if we actually eradicate these if people who are worried about the ethics of animal control and just carrying on doing animal control, if we carry on for infinity poisoning, trapping rats, possums, stoats, then there's going to be an infinite number of animals will be killed. So you could argue that by getting rid of them all fairly quickly, there's going to be fewer killed in the long run, and ethically it's better. So I would say that's the sort of thing that needs to be perhaps put out there. This is a big one. It's not just because I'm in a bunch of research people here. If we're doing a step change with Predator-Free New Zealand in terms of the management of these predators, there needs to be a step change in research funding. We need to have really significant research funding, and not just into new tools and techniques, but into actually the sort of things I've been talking about, monitoring and demonstration of benefits. But the concluding point is that the benefits for native biodiversity are absolutely immense. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity, so I'll stop at that point.